The day the wind began to roar across the empty plateau, I felt as though the air itself were searching for a story it had once known by heart. I had walked since dawn beneath a bleached blue sky, my boots cutting zigzags through red dust older than the memory of nations. The map I carried was less cartography than rumor, a curling sheet onto which some forgotten traveler had inked circles around names long since devoured by sand. A with Makrandi, Thamid, Ras, cities the Quran speaks of in a single breath. Cities Allah raised when their people mocked the messengers who tried to steer them back toward light. Islam teaches that earth remembers even when men choose amnesia, and here, on this silent shelf of land, the earth felt intent on reminding me. I crested a ridge where broken pillars rose like finger bones. Sunlight flared in the cracks of limestone, striking pale fire along every fold. The wind keened through those empty columns, carrying notes of desolation and, if I listened hard enough, reverence. I sat and opened my journal, its pages soft with wear, and began to write what I saw, not because I believed words could cage the scene, but because the prophets I had spent my life studying left records in more than scripture. They stitched testimony into landscape. Verse 27 of Surah Al-Ahqāf tells how countless towns were destroyed around the people of Mecca as lessons we had set forth for them, yet the Quraysh paid no heed. I wondered whether any of those who once lived here had raised their eyes toward the Hijaz and glimpsed the very dawn of revelation, bright, terrible, hopeful, and still turned back to their idols, determined to drown out thunder with drums. The ruins fell behind me as I followed a dried riverbed that curved like a scar. Field notes from an Algerian archaeologist had marked a cluster of pre-Islamic tombs deeper in the valley, each etched with symbols of defeated deities. He believed a prophet no one could now name which had preached among them, pleading under blistering stars for a people drunk on their own invincibility to unshackle themselves from stone and myth. They had laughed, of course, they always laughed. When the punishment came, it wore many masks: an earthquake that shredded the valley floor, a venomous wind that peeled doors from hinges, sheets of flame that fell from a sky gone copper with rage. And in the morning, says the Quran, all was still. I reached the tombs at noon. No epitaphs remained, only facades bitten clean by sand. I stepped inside the largest vault, where the roof had collapsed inward centuries before, leaving a ragged aperture through which sunlight dripped. Under that light lay a single shard of turquoise pottery. I traced my thumb along its glaze and pictured it once cupping water at a communal well, the well a prophet might have stood beside while recounting the story of people still more ancient, Pharaoh's court with its sorcerers and swallowed serpents. The ark sluicing beneath black clouds, Ibrahim watching birds return to life at Allah's command. Each tale was a note in a chord the Quran strikes again and again: believe before the dust of disbelief chokes the breath from your throat. Outside, heat shimmered. I refilled my canteen and walked south toward hills scalloped like the folds of a sleeping beast. Legends call them Jabal Nar, mountains of fire, for the way their flint veins spark at dusk. A Bedouin elder once swore to me that Moses had wandered here during an exile unrecorded by Torah or Injil, carrying with him the smell of Sinai, his hair stitched with embers from the burning bush. I doubted the chronology but loved the image, one prophet crossing the scorched footprints of another, both guided by revelation's unbroken thread. In moments like that, history feels less a timeline than a river in flood, sweeping every human second into the same roaring present tense. My satellite phone crackled with a message from Dr. Amina Saleh, the epigrapher funding my journey. She asked whether I had found any inscriptions to photograph. I texted back, nothing legible yet, only echoes. She replied with a verse, and we have certainly presented to the people in this Quran every kind of example, but man has ever been most of anything disputant. Her translation. I could hear her gentle frustration inside the words, the sense that unless we wrap truth in data points, our age will shrug and walk on. I pocketed the phone. Some proofs refuse spreadsheets. Some proofs require dust in your lungs and starlight in your tea. Night slid in like ink poured across parchment. I built a fire, fed it fat chips of juniper, and watched sparks climb into a sky spiked with strange constellations. I thought of Hud, the prophet sent to Awith Makrandi, warning a people whose architecture scraped cloud ops, whose commerce fattened caravans. Hud spoke of humility, of gratitude owed to the one who knits skin to bone, but the merchants shook gold bracelets and called him mad. When the sound of their laughter finally ceased, it was replaced by a howling wind no mortal could stand against. Archaeologists debate where Awith Makrandi once thrived, Oman, Yemen, the empty quarter, but the Quran renders coordinates irrelevant. The important thing is that they were warned and they dismissed the warning, and now only dunes know their names. The embers faded to ash, the color of bone. Somewhere, jackals yipped. I pulled my cloak tight and let sleep settle, wondering what dreams might rise from a ground saturated with repentance. I dreamed of a city whose minarets were carved from moonlight, its streets flowed with voices reciting Quranic verses that shimmered in the air like calligraphy made of wind. At the center stood the prophets, not separate but gathered in quiet conversation, and with water still dripping from his beard, Ibrahim smelling of charred idols, Esa with Makron carrying the hush of miracles, Muhammad cradling the weight of revelation. They spoke no words I could catch, yet their expressions needed no translation. Relief, triumph, sorrow for those who would still refuse. When I woke, the eastern horizon bled rose gold, and for a moment the tombs around me looked less like ruins than the foundations of something waiting to be rebuilt. By midday, I reached a ravine where terraces once supported orchards of fig and pomegranate. The irrigation channels remained, carved into bedrock with obsessive precision, but every branch had long since turned to charcoal. A lone cistern, half buried, held water clear as polished glass. I knelt to drink and saw my reflection split by ripples. Behind that wavering image appeared another face, a boy's, perhaps 10 years old, eyes wide with a hunger that was not for food. He belonged to a memory I had tried to bury, my first reading of the Quran after my mother's funeral, my grief so dense I could scarcely breathe as I turned from surah to surah searching for reasons. Verses 27 and 28 emerged like a hand on my shoulder. Look at the civilizations we destroyed for their arrogance, ask their idols why they did not intercede. The boy in the water nodded as if pleased I had finally arrived where I needed to be. A sudden gust scattered dust across the pool. The reflection vanished. I stood and followed the ravine downward until its walls opened onto a plain striped with salt. Far ahead rose the silhouette of a colossal gate, an archway tall enough to frame a thunderhead, its keystone carved with an inscription half erased but still legible in places, "We build so none may forget us." I tasted irony like grit on my tongue. The prophets begged their nations to remember Allah, the nations vowed to remember themselves, and now only travelers hauling journals through furnace heat bothered to recall either pledge. I passed beneath the arch. Beyond lay avenues choked by dunes. Here and there, remnants of mosaic floors flashed iridescent where sand had been blown clear, shards arranged in intricate tessellations, each tile a color improbable in the scorched domain, cobalt, emerald, midnight violet. I imagined artisans kneeling with copper tools fitting slivers into patterns mirroring the order they thought divine yet refused to recognize in monotheistic terms. Perhaps the prophets sent among them pointed to the symmetry under their knees and said, "See? Even beauty obeys command, why will you not?" Perhaps they answered that beauty was their own to wield and command, a myth for simpler minds. The Quran insists every people received its warner. Walking these streets, I felt those warnings vibrating still, like the ringing of a bell long after the clapper falls silent. Dusk again, purple poured over stone. I climbed a ziggurat whose steps survived only in zigzag fragments. At the summit I found a niche overlooking the city's skeleton and read a prayer remembered from childhood. "Our Lord, forgive us and our brothers who preceded us in faith." The wind replied with a soft roar as though worlds away an ocean had just thrown itself against cliffs. I closed my eyes and listened. Beneath the wind's roar came another sound, low, persistent, the hush of innumerable breaths. For an instant I sensed the prophets standing beside me, their footprints overlapping mine, their voices layered into the wind. They had walked through fire, flood, exile, mockery, and in every trial reaffirmed the same certainty. La ilaha illa Allah. There is no deity but God. And across the centuries, the earth they once crossed kept whispering the refrain, waiting for travelers thick-skinned enough to hear. I opened my eyes. The plain lay dark yet faintly silvered by a newborn moon. Tomorrow I would push farther south, where rumor held the remains of a caravansary in which a nameless prophet healed the sick with prayers alone. Tonight, though, I would sleep beside the ziggurat, trusting the prophet's vigil to guard my dreams. I wondered what stories the next stretch of desert would demand and whether I would be brave enough to write them with the clarity they deserved. The dawn that greeted me on the plain was pale and metallic, as if the sun itself had been hammered thin against the horizon. I broke camp quickly, burying the embers of my fire beneath a neat cairn of stones in the old Bedouin fashion, no trace left for scavengers or spirits. Southward the land sloped into a vast basin where mirages puddled in wavering sheets. I walked toward a blur that looked like water until it resolved into cracked salt, gleaming like a million shards of broken mirror. Every footstep crunched. With each crunch I heard an echo, ghost applause for civilizations that had once mined this basin for sodium and pride. Mid-morning found me threading a corridor of basalt pinnacles black as furnace slag. The smell of iron hung in the air. When the wind shifted, it carried a sweeter scent, frankincense. I followed that invisible trail until the ground dipped and a stone caravanserai revealed itself, half-buried but unmistakable, a rectangle of walls fused by heat, its courtyard open to the sun. Scholars had long debated whether this was the ancient Khan al-Mu'minin, the Inn of the Believers, famed in pre-Islamic folklore as a refuge where a wandering prophet cured an entire caravan stricken with fever. No inscription confirmed the tale, yet local tribes still swore that at night you could hear whispered to echoing beneath the arches. Inside, pillars formed an arcade around a central well. Near its lip lay desiccated camel bones bleached whiter than moonlit sand. I knelt to examine the well, water shone 30 feet below, clear and still. Lowering a tin cup on a paracord line, I drew up a draft that tasted paradoxically of rain and smoke. As I drank I imagined those sick merchants centuries ago, their skin hot to the touch, their breaths shallow when a prophet, perhaps Lee, perhaps Schwabe, entered with nothing but certainty in his eyes and recited words that snapped the fever's spine. The Quran is studded with such moments where faith intersects flesh and leaves health in its wake, a reminder that belief is not abstraction but pulse and sinew. I moved deeper into the shadows where stables once housed 100 camels. Faded murals survived on the plaster, stylized dunes, a domed city, a line of figures dressed in garments the color of sunset. One figure raised an open hand while others knelt. The artist had used crushed lapis for the sky, and even after a millennium the blue blazed. I photographed the scene, then traced the prophet's outline with my fingertips. Plaster crumbled, releasing a puff of dust that smelled faintly of myrrh. I sneezed and laughed at my own fragility. Centuries collapsed under my skin's pressure, while the message those murals carried had outlived empires. Beyond the stables, a corridor sloped downward into a subterranean chamber cooler than any desert cave I'd known. My flashlight beam found shelves carved into the walls where once, I guessed, scrolls had been stored. Only ragged scraps remained, fibers glued into stone by time. Yet on one scrap a single Kufic letter endured, Aleph, the beginning of every Arabic alphabet, the first stroke of Bismillah, the axis around which meaning rotates. Seeing it, I felt dizziness, as though the chamber itself were tipping toward revelation. Aleph, Lam, Mim, I whispered, those mystical letters that preface some surahs, their precise meaning hidden yet luminous, like doorways left ajar so seekers might glimpse infinity's lamplight. When I resurfaced, noon's heat had turned the courtyard into a kiln. I rested beneath an arch whose soffit glittered with tesserae in shapes of stars nested within stars, a geometry echoing the Quranic assertion that Allah created the heavens in layers. I ate dates and cheese, then unrolled my prayer mat. As I bowed, my forehead met stone worn smooth by countless travelers performing the same prostration. The thought sent a tremor through me. Generations of believers and skeptics had knelt here, some healed, some still doubtful, yet all pressed the same earth. The prophet's task was never to coerce belief, only to convey it. Acceptance or refusal lay with the listener, and the consequences rippled forward like desert wind shaping dunes. After I set out again, skirting mesas that rose like overturned ships. The track I chose was marked by cairns spaced irregularly, a signal, according to nomads, that the route protected sacred ground. I obeyed the markers until twilight leaked peach and violet across the sky. Ahead, a thin river glimmered, and on its far bank a village of mud-brick houses clung to terraces. Palm fronds rustled above rooftops patched with corrugated tin. Children drove goats, their laughter mingling with bleats. As I waded the shallows, an old woman at the water's edge watched me with hawk-dark eyes. Her scarf was indigo, her posture regal. When I greeted her with salam, she replied in formal Arabic, surprising for such a remote place, "Peace upon you, seeker. Whose path do you follow?" "Path of memory," I answered, "and of the messages Allah sent to warn mankind." She nodded as though ticking a scholar's box. "Then you will wish to speak with Sheikh Idris before the moon is high." She pointed to a tower near the village's heart, its whitewash peeling but its minaret straight. "He guards a relic that sings when touched by honest hands." Her phrasing prickled my nerves. Relics in Islam occupy an ambiguous status, honored, yes, but never worshipped. Still, curiosity tugged me down narrow lanes scented with baking flatbread and jasmine. The mosque's wooden door stood open. Inside, lamps cast honey light on mosaic floors of turquoise and ochre. A single figure, thin, stooped, sat cross-legged beneath the mihrab. His beard, snow-white, reached his sternum. He looked up and his eyes reflected lamplight like twin candles. I introduced myself, explaining my research. He listened without blinking, then gestured for me to sit. "I maintain," he began, "that truth is not discovered but revealed in layers, like the skins of an onion, each layer necessary, each making the eyes water." His accent was Hijazi, softened by decades of desert wind. From a leather pouch he drew a fragment of stone no larger than a sparrow's egg veined with green. This, he said, fell from the sky the night our ancestors here rejected a prophet's call. It was fire then, but by dawn only this heart remained, still warm. My forefathers kept it as testimony. I reached out. The fragment felt cool, smoother than polished glass. A humming tickled my palm, perhaps vibration from blood pumping in my fingertips, yet it echoed like a far-off chant. I recalled verse 28 of Surah Al-Ahqāf. Idols failed to help their worshippers because that which they had fabricated was falsehood. In my hand lay proof, if I chose to read it, that skies themselves protest when truth is mocked. I asked the sheikh why the stone had never been taken to a museum. He smiled. Museums label. Their glass cases whisper distance. Here, pilgrims may touch, may feel both weight and emptiness. He wrapped the stone again and slipped it away. You will camp on the plateau north of the river, he instructed, as though reading a map inside my skull. There stand 3 fig trees twisting from the same root. Between them dig. What you find will belong to no curator but to the story you pursue. Before I could question further, he rose for Maghrib prayer. I followed the congregation forming behind him. When we bowed, my spine aligned with his frail silhouette and I felt an electrical cord of continuity, one more link in the chain. Night seeped across the fields. I climbed to the plateau, located the triune figs silhouetted against star-misted heavens, and began to dig with a folding spade. The soil, loam mixed with sand, gave easily. 6 inches down my blade struck wood. I cleared dirt to reveal a cedar box bound by copper bands corroded to verdigris. The lid bore no lock. I lifted it, half expecting relics, but found folded linen protecting a stack of thin clay tablets incised with angular script. Akkadian? No, closer to Old South Arabian yet infused with Kufic flourishes. Some scholar back in Riyadh would weep with delight. Under the tablets lay a rolled parchment sealed by wax stamped with a crescent inside a circle. I peeled the seal. The parchment unraveled to a single sentence repeated in 5 languages: Sabaean, Syriac, Greek, Early Arabic, and Latin. The messengers walk before you, follow the footprints if you would survive the storm. My pulse hammered. A cartographer's grid accompanied the lines and circles intersecting at a point marked Kalb al-Ar, heart of the desert. Could this be the birthplace of a prophet lost to canonical lists? Or perhaps a meeting ground where several prophets once crossed paths, trading burdens the way travelers trade waterskins? I repacked the box and set it beside my sleeping mat. The plateau stretched empty under constellations, yet I felt company, figures unseen, their breaths stirring the fig leaves. I lay staring at Vega while jackals barked in the dry riverbed below. At some hour past midnight I jolted awake, heart racing. A dream? I remembered walking down a corridor lined with torches toward a chamber where 7 shadows stood encircling a globe of blue fire. Each shadow bore a symbol, a staff, an arc, a hewn stone, a scroll. They spoke simultaneously, yet the words were clear: witness so others may believe. The blue fire pulsed and I woke. Dawn painted the sky apricot. With tablets secured in my pack, I descended to the village to thank Sheikh Idris, but the mosque's door was barred, no lamps lit. A boy sweeping dust from steps said the sheikh had left before first light, bound for a wedding in a neighboring oasis. I knew better than to chase him. The desert often loaned its guides only briefly. I bought flatbread and honey, filled canteens, and followed the map's angles toward the heart of the desert. For 3 days I trekked across terrain that looked forged from rusted swords, each dusk bringing crimson shadows that bled into night. Along wadis where nothing should grow, I found tufts of lavender bursting through cracks and felt the old Quranic promise: Allah brings the living from the dead and the dead from the living. On the 4th morning the ground leveled into an amphitheater of alabaster sand half a mile wide. At its center a single black rock protruded, glossy as obsidian. Around it lay rings of low stone benches, as if an audience once sat here to witness a sermon delivered by the wind. I stepped into the bowl. Silence deepened until I heard my pulse echo in my ears. Near the rock's base a groove had been chiseled, and inside it rested a clay oil lamp charred by ancient flame. I knelt, struck a match, and lit the lamp. A blue flame sputtered, then steadied, casting wavering halos on the sand. I opened my journal to sketch the scene, but words fled, replaced by sensation, the hush before revelation when the heart, terrified and exultant, waits for meaning to descend. Then came the sound, a sigh, nothing more, yet it coursed the length of the amphitheater. I realized the basin was crafted to amplify the faintest whisper. I held my breath, listened. The sigh expanded into syllables spoken in a language older than grammar, a murmur of submission and resolve. Though I understood none of it, my bones recognized devotion the way skin recognizes warmth. In that resonance I felt the presence of prophets not as distant figures but as still speaking your voices threading through sand and star. The lamp flickered out. Noon glare poured into the bowl and the voices faded. I placed the lamp in my pack knowing museums would call it artifact while I would call it echo. When I turned to leave, footprints marred the sand behind me, my own, yes, but beside them others, lighter, vanishing as sun baked the surface smooth. I felt no fear, only urgency. The message was plain: carry these stories forward before time erases even dust. As I climbed the amphitheater's rim, wind erased every trace of my passage. From up top, the basin looked untouched, pristine as revelation on the morning it arrives. Somewhere beyond the heat shimmer lay still more ruins, more inscriptions, more whispered exhortations. The path stretched endless. Yet I walked with a steadiness I had not known before, aware that I was not merely chronicling the prophet's affirmation of faith, I was, in my small way, continuing it, line by line, step by step, page by page. Wind returned on the fifth evening, riding a cold front that cracked the sky with silent lightning. I watched those pale, branch-white flashes fork behind distant clouds while I pitched camp on a table of sandstone sparsely tufted with wormwood. The lamp from the heart of the desert sat by my knee. Every time the lightning flared, its blackened clay twinkled as though relighting from within. I wondered whether meteorologists would call the coming weather a Khamsin or a Shamal, but I knew the Quran had older names: Re-Arser for the screaming gale that destroyed Awith Makrandi, Aya for the blast that froze Thamud in mid-breath. Verse 27 of Surah Al-Ahqāf murmured in memory, and we had already destroyed what surrounds you of towns, and we diversified the signs that they might return. Out here the signs were rarely subtle. I woke before dawn to a silence so absolute it felt manufactured. The storm had vaulted farther east, leaving behind air scrubbed clean, the sky punched full of cold stars. Only one sound intruded: an irregular clink, like porcelain tapped by a fingernail. I traced it to the lamp in my pack. Its shard-like glaze was ticking as metal cools after smithing. I lifted it gingerly. The surface throbbed with warmth though no flame burned inside. When I set my ear to the spout I heard, not sound precisely, more a coated pressure against the eardrum, syllables bursting too quickly to parse. I mouthed Al-Fatiha and the ticking ceased. Heat drained from the clay as if a presence had slipped back into sleep. I packed and started northwest toward Jabal al-Khiyar, mountain of choice, where the map's radial lines converged like threads drawn to a needle's eye. Locals claimed that two prophets, some named Madan and Shuaib interchangeably, once met there and debated whether faith should reach men by argument or example. The mountain's shale flaked under my boots, shedding layers thin as onion skin. Each flake caught dawnlight, prisming pink, gold, vermilion colors that reminded me of stained glass windows in Midwestern cathedrals back home, where sunlight once inked sermon on the mount across my grandmother's Bible. She never read Arabic, yet she had told 8-year-old me that prophets everywhere hand one another the same torch, only accent changes. Close to noon I spotted survey flags whipping along a ridge, red nylon triangles stapled to rebar. A field team. Their base camp crouched in a wadi, 3 silver domes glinting like fallen moons. Generators thrummed. I hailed them and soon shook hands with Dr. Farid Hamza, geoarchaeologist from the Jordanian Royal University, his beard bristling with red dust. He eyed the cedar box strapped to my pack, and I admitted what lay inside. He whistled, half awe, half professional hunger. Old South Arabian with Kufic inflection, he guessed. I nodded. He led me into the main dome, where LiDAR scans bloomed neon on screens. They'd mapped a honeycomb of tunnels beneath Jabal al-Khiyar, corridors bent at deliberate 45-degree angles like the breathing shafts of ancient dam structures. We think pilgrims used them as wind organs, Farid said. When the mountain gusted, different corridors produced different notes, an ecological Azan calling travelers to pause. He invited me to descend with his crew. Access required ropes and a willingness to belly crawl through apertures scarcely wider than a coffin. I signed the waiver, heart quick. Inside the mountain the air chilled 10 degrees, tasting of wet slate. Flashlight beams javelined along walls inscribed with spirals that thickened into script, then dissolved back into spirals. At one elbow bend the spiral became unmistakable Kufic, Al-Haq, truth. Another bend, Al-Abr, patience. Scripture distilled into single words like fragments of advice whispered by wind. Farid's grad student Layla pinged a tuning fork, the tone leapt off stone and deepened into an organ-like drone. She grinned. Every corridor tuned to one root frequency, she said. If you chant at the right pitch the whole mountain resonates. I tried intoning the basmala, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. My voice came back octaves lower, braided with a choir of echoes that seemed to originate miles below. The lamp in my pack vibrated, clay clicking against canteen. Layla's eyes widened, she heard it too. Farid murmured, we may be trespassing on a form of acoustic devotion. Deeper in, the tunnel widened into a chamber shaped like a date pit. Its floor bore a mosaic half erased by moisture yet still gleaming, concentric rings of cobalt tesserae framing a stylized compass rose. At the compass's center lay a circular depression exactly the lamp's width. Without thinking, I set the lamp into the socket. It seeded with a sigh. All headlamps dimmed, batteries intact yet strangled by a stronger illumination. The lamp rekindled blue fire, haloing the chamber in watery radiance. Sound blossomed, not words, but a scale of rising intervals like a finger climbing oud strings. The mosaic rings pulsed, coaxing the echoes until distinct voices detached from resonance. Hud teaching humility. Lee pleading with Thamit to spare the she-camel. Luqman urging his son to gratitude. Layer upon layer until I could not separate history from heartbeat. Layla was crying, silent tears carving her dusty cheeks. Farid pressed recording mics against the wall, hands trembling. I heard my own breath hitch when a female voice surfaced, Maryam in the pains of labor by the palm tree, reciting, if only I had died and been forgotten, and a gentler voice, possibly Jibril, answering, shake the trunk, and ripe dates will fall for you. The Quran's verse 1932 yet sung in a dialect older than Qurayshi Arabic. I tasted iron, I'd bitten my lip. Then abrupt silence, lamp dark. Headlamps flicked back to full strength. The mosaic rings no longer glowed, only missing tesserae showed where adhesive had melted and resolidified. Layla whispered, did we just hear time speaking? Farid placed a calming hand on her shoulder yet failed to steady his own. We retrieved the lamp cold once more and hurried out before seismic nerves could buckle. Outside, wind had shifted again, now thick with static. Dust devils sprinted between domes, shredding survey banners. Farid begged to study the lamp but accepted my refusal, already busy swabbing sand from LiDAR pallets. I left camp with a charger full of audio files and an address scribbled by Layla. If understanding turns heavy, share the weight, she'd written, then underlined her email. By dusk I ascended Jabal al-Khiyar's western spur to set fresh camp. The audio haunted my earbuds. Each playback revealed harmonics my ears had missed in situ, sub-bass hums, arrhythmic clicks like a heart monitoring device. I catalogued what verses I recognized, cross-checking Yusuf Ali's translation on a pocket Quran. Yet gaps loomed. Prophet voices braided foreign languages, Proto-Semitic? Something Cushitic, interleaved with Arabic cadences. Perhaps the language of the birds, I thought, recalling how Suleiman in Surah and Naml understood their speech. Near midnight a helicopter's rotors whipped canyon air, corporate exploration crews scanning for rare earth deposits. Floodlights trawled slopes, Jabal al-Khiyar glittered like obsidian struck by furnace sparks. I killed my camp light and hugged the ground uneasy. Commercial rights often outbid heritage protections. I imagined dynamite fracturing the wind organ tunnels, prophets' voices crushed under heaps of lithium ore, and rage sharpened my pulse. I texted Dr. Amina, corporate survey in quadrant 32. Urgent need for UNESCO intervention. She replied within minutes, will escalate to ministry. Meanwhile, document everything. Truth has allies. The chopper veered south, search beams dwindling. I exhaled grit and unrolled parchment from the cedar box. The multilingual sentence, the messengers walk before you, follow the footprints if you would survive the storm, glowed faintly under starlight as though ink were phosphorescent. I traced the cartographer's grid, the next coordinates marched toward a cratered expanse labeled Almak, the effaced. Folklore claimed lightning there once sheared the topsoil into glass sheets. Yet myths also insisted that beneath the glass, artifacts lay hermetically sealed, scrolls, perhaps, or bones. I slept shallowly, waking to each rustle of tumbleweed. At pre-dawn chill I broke camp, descending scree slopes until a salt flat unfurled wide enough to mimic an inland sea. Jagged plates of desert glass winked like smashed bottle shards. Their edges sliced my boot soles. I kept stepping until sunrise exploded crimson against the horizon. Every shard flamed with alpenglow, turning the flat into a burning mirror. I shielded my eyes and almost missed the silhouette of a man kneeling near a boulder of fused quartz. He wore a camel wool abaya the color of smoke. As I approached, he raised a hand without turning. Gently, he said. Words fracture in this place. His face, when he finally looked, was lined as palm bark, eyes silver with cataract yet piercing. He introduced himself as Jamal ibn Yusuf, desert hermit and former calligrapher. I write now only in wind, he murmured, sweeping a finger so sand swirled into looping diacritics, then vanished. He tapped the boulder. Inside its glossy depth, air bubbles had trapped seeds, tiny, perfect. Lightning sealed them, he said. Strike the rock and glass shatters, seeds meet air, faith revives. I asked whether any prophet came here. He chuckled. Prophets come everywhere. Question is, do we arrive in time to hear them leave? I told him of the lamp, the voices, the coordinates. His smile thinned. Storm brewing, he said, gesturing at sky where anvils of cloud boiled. You carry tinder for lightning greater than fire. But remember, signs demand responsibility. Surah Al-Baqarah warns not to hide testimony. He produced a chisel and motioned me to help score a groove around the quartz boulder. Hours later, sweat-burning eyes, we levered off a slab. Seeds tumbled free, almond-colored, delicate. Jamal placed half in my palm. Plant where doubt grows thickest, he said. Let the parable flower. I sealed them in foil with silica gel. Archaeology teaches sterility, but prophecy teaches hope. Thunder rolled from the west. Jamal bowed farewell, sinking into mirage until he blurred out of existence. I hurried east, glass tinkling under boots, every shard reflecting bruised cumulonimbus swollen with intent. As the first drop struck sand, I felt again that coated pressure in the ear, lamp ticking inside my pack, seeds rustling like rosary beads. Verse 28 threaded my thoughts. False gods avail nothing once truth reveals itself. Rain hammered, smacking glass into crazed cobwebs. Steam hissed. The desert smelled suddenly of ruptured ozone and petrichor, Earth's sigh when pardoned. I found shelter beneath an overhang. Sheet rain erased tracks, polished dunes into smooth copper. Lightning speared a ridge, fracturing rock with a roar that ricocheted inside bone. For minutes after each flash, the lamp glowed faint azure, heatless, loyal, alive. Between thunderclaps I heard what might have been hoofbeats echoing from no visible riders, then a woman's voice reciting Surah Ad-Du, by the morning brightness and by the night when it covers with darkness, your Lord has not forsaken you. She pronounced each letter with calm finality as though chiseling comfort into the storm itself. The deluge slackened near dawn. A rainbow arced low, its violet band bruised but unbroken. On the newly scoured sand lay hundreds of fragments, ancient pottery unearthed by water's violence, shards painted with patterns identical to those in the caravanserai mural, sunset-robed figures kneeling before a single upraised hand. I collected several, weighing them like pieces of a puzzle time insisted I assemble. My GPS blinked weak, battery soaked. So I oriented by instinct toward a cleft between hills where rainwater flowed into darkness. Somewhere beyond that cleft lay the next footprint, the next echo, the next call to remember before forgetting calcified. I set off, backpack heavier with seeds, shards, and stories. Behind me, sunlight struck the desert glass, scattering rays that spiderwebbed into the sky like signals a distant watcher might decipher. I thought of Farid's corridors tuned to devotion, of Layla's tears, of Sheikh Idris's stone that hummed only for honest hands. The prophets had never offered easy comfort, they offered mirrors and the courage to face what mirrors show. My mirror now was the desert, pitiless yet pulsing with hidden water ready to bloom at a single downpour of faith. I walked faster, sensing not pursuit but invitation, each heartbeat translating into one word, continue. A hush fell over the cleft the moment I stepped inside, as though the desert itself were holding its breath to hear what I might do next. Sunlight narrowed behind me until only a blade of gold slashed across the rock. One step deeper and that blade vanished, replaced by the blue-gray luminance of minerals that glimmered like trapped moonlight. Somewhere water coursed, an underground stream whispering in tones too quiet for the sun-blinded world above. I followed the sound, boots splashing through silt softened by last night's storm. The air smelled of wet copper and sage. Its coolness slid over my skin like a benediction. The tunnel angled downward, walls riven with quartz seams that pulsed faintly under my headlamp. Every 20 or 30 paces I passed niches chiseled at shoulder height. Some were empty, others held shards of terracotta cups blackened by soot, as if long-gone travelers had once lit votive lamps along the route. I counted 11 niches before the passage abruptly widened into a cavern whose roof soared out of my light's reach. High overhead a fissure let daylight spill in a single shaft, illuminating a rock pedestal the color of hematite. Upon it rested a book, impossible yet unmistakable. Binding fashioned from cured goatskin, pages trimmed but ungilded. The volume lay open as though its reader had stepped away only moments earlier. I approached, palms tingling. The text was Arabic of the early Abbasid period, confident Kufic strokes so bold they looked freshly inked. Yet the lines did not correspond to any Quranic surah I knew. They braided fragments from multiple revelations into a tapestry of invocation. And we struck them with storm so they might remember, and they made idols from iron and begged storms to stop. And the idols answered not, though their mouths were wide. Marginalia in finer script unraveled commentary. Remember the lesson of Ars. Let Thamid teach you the price of carved stone. The scribe had stained each note with flecks of blue lapis, a luxury in any century. I brushed a fingertip across one margin and felt warmth, as if ink retained the hand heat of its author. A memory flickered. Jamal the hermit sang prophets come everywhere. Could a prophet have written here in hiding, threading warnings into palimpsests that waited for eyes thirsty enough to read them? As I stood, the overhead fissure widened with a grinding sigh. A sliver of rock dislodged and shattered beside my boot. Dust spiraled through the beam of light. Instinct insisted I move before the fissure birthed an avalanche, yet curiosity anchored my feet. A second chunk fell, clipping my shoulder, and pain answered reason. I snapped photographs of the pages, then closed the book and slid it into a waterproof satchel. The moment the cover shut, the beam of light dimmed, as though the cavern resented the theft of its treasure, and a tremor rippled through stone. I sprinted for the passage, heart piston hard. Behind me rock thundered, sealing the cavern with a detonation of echoes. Darkness gulped my headlamp beam, dust swallowing oxygen. I scraped forward on hands and knees, coughing copper-tasting grit, until the ground sloped upward and a draft kissed my face. Minutes later I spilled onto a ledge overlooking a valley so green it startled my desert-numbed eyes. Acacias dotted a floodplain where stormwater pooled in mirrored sheets. Goats grazed under their own reflections while children splashed in ankle-deep shallows, laughter ringing off cliffs. Terraced fields stepped up the valley walls, thick with barley spiking toward sunrise. The sight felt hallucinated, Garden of Eden embroidered onto wasteland. Yet as I drew in steadying breaths, the landscape refused to dissolve. I recognized it from satellite photos I had studied months earlier. Wadi al-Hafra, nourished by a hidden aquifer that surfaced only in years of heavy rain. Tradition claimed a prophet, some ascribed his name to Shuaib, had once struck the valley floor with his staff, coaxing water from stone the way Musa, by Allah's leave, opened springs for the Israelites. A farmer approached, turban white against sun-browned skin. He carried a curved hoe and the relaxed suspicion of one accustomed to strangers. I greeted him in Arabic and explained the collapse behind me. He nodded gravely, then lifted his gaze to the sky. Storms have been stranger these past 7 seasons, he said. Perhaps Earth rises to remind men of its creator. He beckoned me toward a low house washed blue with indigo dye. There, his wife pressed sweet tea into my hands before I could protest. Mint cooled the blisters grief had left in my throat. News reached us mid-cup. A convoy of corporate survey trucks, likely the same outfit whose helicopter had scoured Jabal al-Khiyar, was grinding toward the valley's north rim. The vehicle's weight threatened to crack open the fragile aquifer. The farmer spat dust. They promise desalination plants, he muttered, but they will leave only holes where water once dreamed. Eyes around the courtyard turned to me, the outsider carrying rumor of UNESCO petitions and ministry appeals. My stomach clenched. I had no paper authority, only words and whatever weight the prophet's echoes might lend them. I unrolled the disaster map from the cedar box, its grid lines crossing beneath the bold cartographic circle marking Kalb el-Ar. The children crowded close, tracing symbols with mud-streaked fingers. I pointed southeast, where the valley tapered into an ancient caravan route. If the convoy comes from the north, we should guide them onto bedrock beyond the fields, I said, feeling the absurdity of commanding a community I had known mere minutes. Yet the elders exchanged glances and, one by one, nodded. Sometimes authority flowers not from tenure but from the clarity of desperation. Within the hour we marched, half the village armed with hoes and iron staves, the other half ferrying goats to higher ground. As we climbed toward the rim, sensors spiked my phone with proximity alerts. 4 trucks, 2 flatbeds hauling mobile drill rigs, 1 crane, 1 personnel carrier. Dust plumes marked their crawl over shale. I toggled the audio from Jabal al-Khiyar through a portable speaker and let the wind organ chorus roll out, strings of prophetic voices braiding across the valley. Hud's plea, Leah's warning, Maryam's labor cry, they poured into the emptiness like water-seeking fractures. Engines hesitated. From binoculars I saw men lean from cabs, heads tilted, as though hearing a language carved directly into their spines. I advanced, waving both arms. The first truck braked yards short of the slope. Its driver, face masked in a keffiyeh, climbed down. I recognized the orange logo of Petromagna on his sleeve, same corporation that had sniffed lithium in Jabal al-Khiyar. I spoke quickly, citing heritage statutes, groundwater vulnerability, local sovereign rights. My words skittered like sand across steel. The driver shrugged. His orders stood until an injunction arrived on ministerial letterhead. The valley's elders formed a semicircle behind me, silent but immovable. Children perched on boulders above, holding slingshots loaded with pebbles. Davidic silhouettes etched against cobalt sky. The driver's radio crackled. A voice barked coordinates and schedule slippage. He hesitated, eyes flicking to the portable speaker where Hud's echo faded into Leah's calm entreaty. Here is the she-camel of God. A sign for you. Let her graze and do not harm her. The driver's shoulders sagged. He turned the radio off. This location is above my pay grade, he muttered, climbed back into his cab, and throttled the engine into reverse. One by one the trucks followed, wheels crunching a retreat over shale until dust swallowed their silhouettes. Relief swarmed the valley like locusts of joy. Elders clasped my hands. Children draped goat wool garlands around my neck. Yet triumph dimmed as quickly as it rose. Convoys could return tomorrow with permits in neat plastic sleeves. We needed testimony no official could ignore. I produced the goatskin book, its pages humming under my thumb like captive bees. The village imam, a lean scholar with date pit worry lines, examined the calligraphy. He whispered Subna Allah and kissed the margin. This is no mere manuscript, he declared. It is sanad, a chain linking ink to revelation. We convened beneath an acacia while the sky cooled peach. Using a solar scanner borrowed from the schoolhouse, we digitized every page, then uploaded the files through the Imam's satellite link to servers in Amman, Istanbul, Kuala Lumpur, multiple zealously redundant nodes. Within hours, screenshots fluttered across academic and social media circles. Hashtags blooming. Hashtag Prophet's Voice, hashtag Desert Manuscript. Scholars speculating about its anomaly of intertext. Activists rallying to safeguard Wadi al-Hafra as a living archive. News outlets requested interviews. UNESCO's regional desk pinged my phone with a curt inquiry for coordinates. Bureaucracy had awakened. That night celebration tasted of lentils, cumin, and relief. Women drummed plastic jugs. Men twirled canes. Children's bare feet raised dust that spun into galaxies under lanternlight. Amid the dance, someone pressed a hand-carved flute into mine. I answered their rhythm with faltering scales. The lamp in my satchel glowed with every crescendo. Small pulses of sapphire that seemed to keep time better than I did. Seeds from the glassfire boulder lay in a clay bowl at the party's edge, soaking in river water so they might sprout by first light. The prophets insisted that warnings and mercy travel side by side. Near dawn, I slipped away to the floodplain. Fog clung above mirrored pools, reflecting a sky bruised indigo and rose. I planted the first seed where goat hooves had churned yesterday's mud. I whispered the opening verse of Surah Al-An'am. All praise is due to Allah, who created the heavens and earth. Then covered the seed with a fingertip of soil. I planted 3 more seeds where barley rose turned rocky, and another beside the collapsed entrance of the cavern, in hopes the roots would anchor crumbling stone. My grandmother's voice drifted up from memory. Plant something every time sorrow visits. Make grief a gardener. By midday, a convoy returned, not Petromagna but government geologists in white Toyotas. They bore surveying drones and crisp mandates to evaluate the valley's unique environmental significance. This time letters lay in their briefcases, signed and stamped. The lead scientist, Dr. Selma Mansouri, recognized me from symposium panels. She greeted the imam with respectful salam, photographed the freshly uploaded manuscript facsimiles, and swore a provisional protective zone until UNESCO's inspection. When she asked about other finds, I showed her the cedar box tablets. her face lit with archival yearning. "This valley," she murmured, "is not merely geography. It is verse-given topography." That evening thunderheads massed again, but no lightning followed. Instead, a soft rain sifted over barley, pattering on acacia leaves like the slow applause of angels. I unfolded my prayer mat beside the newly planted seeds. Rain dampened the cotton, beaded on the lamp's clay surface, jeweled the goatskin of the book. Verse 28 of Surah Al-Ahqāf hummed behind my breath. Idols failed their worshippers, because that which they had fabricated was falsehood. In the valley around me stood no idols, only testimonies carved in water, seed, and stone. And those testimonies, I sensed, would not fail. After Ish, I met the Imam atop a ridge overlooking the floodplain. He handed me a leather sling bag stocked with dates, dried yogurt, and copies of the manuscript on a flash drive. "Your road persists," he said. "Storms repair boundaries but widen horizons. Follow the map to Kalb Elar. We will guard what you leave us, inshallah." I shouldered the bag, lamp warm against my ribs. From the ridge, the valley glowed faintly. Lanterns in doorways, reflections in standing water, perhaps even a nascent sprout where the first seed slept. Southeast, far beyond the horizon, lightning stitched clouds purple. I wondered which ruins there awaited me, which echoes, which mirrors. The prophet's footprints stretched onward, and my duty was not to trace them perfectly, only to keep walking, notebook open, heart braced for whatever truths the desert might yet choose to declare. Behind me the village sang a final lullaby, verses of Surah Yasin rising like embers on cool air. I turned my face toward the dark and began the long descent into its silence, grateful for every particle of dust that would light under my boots and testify, however softly, that I had passed this way believing. Sand hammered the soles of my boots for 2 days as I crossed the stony steppe that unrolled southeast of Wadi al-Hafra. Once, under a moon scalloped by cirrus, I glanced back and thought I saw a flicker of lantern light where the valley slept, but distance had already folded it into memory. Ahead lay kilometers of basalt flats that shimmered like oil under noon heat, then cooled to obsidian once the sun slid west. The coordinates stitched on the cedar box parchment guided each bearing, 23 degrees east, then a long diagonal into latitudes that had stopped appearing on tourist maps after a mining conglomerate redrew the borders of viability. No convoys rumbled here, even Bedouin tracks faded as if hooves balked at trespassing too close to the heart of the desert. At dawn of the third day a low ridge rose against jade light. From its crest I looked into a basin so vast it felt less like landform than negative space carved from the earth, a caldera 5 kilometers wide, rimmed by walls of vitrified sand that flashed bottle green in oblique sunbeams. I descended switchbacks beaten by meltwater torrents and reached a floor tessellated with hexagonal plates. Each plate bore hairline cracks that traced geometric vines, nature's own Cufic script spelling lessons for whoever could read stress fractures. Wind whistled through fissures, shaping a minor key hymn that faded whenever I halted as though the caldera preferred its audience in motion. Near the center a monolith thrust upward, pale limestone veined with iron-like arteries beneath aging skin. Its face bore 3 niches, each housing a weather-eaten stele. I brushed dust from the nearest and uncovered a relief of 2 hands releasing a bird skyward, wings outstretched. The second stele showed a staff cleaving a boulder so water-fountained, the third depicted a lone figure standing before a city toppling in flame, arm raised as if to shield eyes that still dared watch. Beneath each scene, a single word remained legible. Patience. Oneness. Witness. I traced the carved letters until stone warmth seeped into my fingertips. Verse 28 of Surah Al-Ahqāf curled inside my thoughts. Fabricated deities failed their worshippers because falsehood owns no marrow. Yet here the message stood unsentimental and enduring. Patience, oneness, witness, the anatomy of prophecy compressed into 3 breaths of stone. A shallow doorway yawned behind the monolith, half hidden by scree. I squeezed through and emerged into a corridor descending at a steady grade, its walls tiled with vitreous sherds fused by ancient heat. Footsteps produced xylophonic pings, each note lingering like glass bells. After 50 meters the passage kinked 90 degrees and opened into a dome-shaped cavern whose ceiling glowed faintly turquoise. Bioluminescent bacteria painted constellations across stalactites, mocking the night sky I'd left above. At the cavern's center rose a pedestal molded from the same fused sand as the caldera rim, smooth as chalcedony and cool beneath my palm. A bowl nested in its top, a perfect circle black as fresh ink. I drew the lamp from my pack. Its clay felt expectant, almost hungry. I lowered it into the bowl. Nothing flared, instead, fluid darkness welled around the base, reflecting upside-down sparks of ceiling light. A tone vibrated through marrow, not heard so much as felt, a 96 Hz hum steady as a heart monitor. The lamp spout exhaled a single thread of blue flame that clung to open air, refusing to rise. Within that flame images flickered, Hud's windblown cloak, Leah's she-camel bending for water, Moose's staff arcing across the Red Sea, Maryam cradling motionless air moments before Isa's first cry. Each tableau lasted no longer than a blink, yet every blink rearranged my pulse. The hum modulated, grew polyphonic. Harmonics braided into words older than syntax, and in their braid I deciphered one imperative plant. I unshouldered the sling bag, withdrew 3 more lightning-sealed seeds, and held them over the flame. They quivered, nacreous coats glinting. I pressed them into a ring of damp sediment that rimmed the pedestal's base, then scooped water from a nearby dripstone to wet the soil. As each seed drank, a phosphorescent pulse shot through the cavern floor, racing outward like ground lightning and vanishing beyond the corridor. A sigh traveled the opposite direction, rock exhaling centuries of withheld breath. Minutes or hours later the flame shrank to an ember and winked out. The lamp cooled. Silence reasserted itself so completely that I could hear capillary blood urging past my eardrums. I recovered the lamp, now inert, and stepped back. In the moisture-dark soil one seed had already split, a pale radical nosing downward. Photosynthetic optimism in a chamber without sun. I wasn't certain whether to laugh or pray, so I did both, the sounds folding into one another like pages of the same book. Returning to the corridor, I found its walls no longer glass black but veiled in thin moss that glittered aqua under my headlamp. The polyphonic pulse must have triggered dormant spores, an underground spring reborn by resonance. Moss cushioned my footfalls as I climbed, and at the doorway a damp breeze kissed my face. Outside, drizzle stitched the caldera basin, beating on fused sand and running into 1,000 rivulets. Where rivulets met fractures, steam rose, rain-quenching rock that had forgotten thirst. On the third niche a hairline crack widened with a gentle pop, shedding a splinter of limestone that shattered near my boot. Beneath the shell glinted a metallic vein. I levered more shards away until a fist-sized nugget of untarnished copper emerged, its surface engraved with swirling script so microscopic I needed loop lenses to pick letters. Even then some characters defied identification, yet one phrase spiraled recognizable across the metal, and to him is the destination. I wrapped the nugget in linen. Some museum might one day display it beneath neutral lights, but its chief value was testimonial. Prophecy leaves artifacts neither wholly natural nor human. Items that tilt taxonomies and force curators to write longer placards. Thunder cracked above the basin. A storm wall marched in from the west, its underbelly bruise purple. I hurried along the caldera floor where rain pooled in hexagonal plates, each plate mirroring slate sky. Sudden movement rippled peripheral vision, sprouts, impossibly quick, pushing through plate seams. First came 2-leaf cotyledons the color of mint, within minutes slender stems unfurled, serrated fronds that glittered with raindrops. The seeds I'd planted below had begun a chain reaction, a subterranean web of dormant seeds must have awaited the same vibratory key for centuries. In moments the basin transformed from obsidian chessboard to emerald tessellation, plant life reclaiming a wound left by ancient cataclysm. The ridge path out of the caldera vanished under wet vines, forcing a slower ascent. Behind me the heart of the desert beat visible now, green pulse expanding outward every time a gust bent the fronds. When I reached the rim lightning forked along the wall, igniting sheets of vitrified sand into liquid mirrors. I turned one last time and watched the reflections fuse into an image I could never photograph, prophets walking across water that was also glass, light stitched to their heels, footprints sowing seedlings in their wake. Whether the scene existed outside retina chemistry scarcely mattered. Testimony, I had learned, often flickers at the edge of verifiability, daring the soul to decide. I trekked east until basalt replaced fused sand and stormlight dimmed behind me. Just past midnight my satellite phone chimed, Dr. Amina's number. Signal bounced ragged but words came through, UNESCO emergency session. Manuscript confirmed 6th century palimpsest. Wadi validated as mixed cultural natural heritage. And your audio file? Oxford acousticians claim frequencies align with structural harmonics of the Kaaba pre-Ottoman reinforcement. Static swallowed a second sentence, then, where are you now? I thumbed coordinates, adding, spreading. She responded with a single takbir, Allahu Akbar, and a promise that ministry helicopters would scan tomorrow for fresh green signatures across the caldera. Let them come, bureaucracy might yet learn to believe its own satellite photos. I camped beneath an overhang, the lamp standing guard beside a diminutive seedling that had hitchhiked in mud on my boot. Its twin leaves cupped moonlight. I opened my notebook to sketch the day's cartography, monolith, cavern, emerging forest, aware that paper could capture only angles while leaving resonance uncaged. I copied the trio of steel words: patience, oneness, witness, and beneath them wrote a fourth: continuance. Because prophecy's echo, once awakened, refused final punctuation. Sleep arrived tangled with dreams. I strode through a city not yet built, minarets glass bright, solar panels gleaming like polished turquoise. Water channels threaded plazas where children floated paper boats inked with verses. Each boat sprouted a sapling as it drifted. Above the hum of traffic, I heard the mountain wind organ's chords, now woven into public loudspeakers, commuters tapping fingers to rhythms first sung by stone. When I knelt to touch pavement, I felt seeds vibrating, ready to break through cement. Awakening, I tasted dust, not asphalt, yet a faint chord lingered in pre-dawn silence, promising the dream belonged not only to sleep. Sun breached the horizon wearing the color of unripe dates. I ate the last of my flatbread, hoisted pack straps that felt lighter than memory suggested, and pointed my steps toward a shimmer where dunes braided into distant haze. I did not know if another map waited or which artifact would volunteer next, but uncertainty had shed its menace. It had become invitation. Verse 35 of Surah Al-Ahqāf surfaced as I walked, so be patient, for the promise of Allah is truth. Patience, oneness, witness, and now promise. The lamp warmed against my ribs though no fire burned within. I imagined the seeds in the caldera pushing upward through newborn soil, leaves counting hours by the passage of migrating clouds. Their roots would find fossils of forgotten idols and curl around them, turning stone into mineral sustenance. In seasons to come, travelers would rest under shade where once only glass scorched bare feet. They would ask how an oasis erupted from rock, and elders would tell of a storm, a hum, and a stranger carrying echoes in a clay lamp. Midday heat rose, carrying mirage cities atop its shoulders. I kept walking, notebook tucked but heart open, listening for the next syllable the desert might entrust to a pilgrim only half worthy. Far behind, the heart of the desert pulsed green against bronze hills, a living exegesis nobody could bulldoze into silence again, not while seeds remembered how to wait and wind remembered every prophet's name, and footsteps, whether of men, women, or angels, kept scoring new verses across the sand.